My name is Emma O'Brien, and I'm a Health Products Distribution Inspector with the HPRA. Today, I'll give you an update on the implementation of the Falsified Medicines Directive in Ireland, specifically with respect to safety features and the requirement for players in the supply chain to scan the 2D barcode on medicines and ensure a tamper evidence seal is intact prior to supply. To start, I will set out the requirements outlined in the Delegated Regulation and briefly revisit the requirements that apply to wholesalers with respect to verification and decommissioning activities. I will then outline what the use and learn phase is and explain why, to date, Ireland is still in the use and learn phase. From there, I will give you an overview of the plan that is currently underway to exit the use and learn phase. And finally, I will outline some areas for wholesalers to consider as you exit the use and learn phase. The Delegated Regulation sets out the rules for safety features appearing on the packaging of medicines for human use. It also sets out the obligations of wholesalers and individuals entitled to supply the public with respect to those safety features. The Delegated Regulation came into effect on the 9th of February 2019, a little over 3 years ago. And since then, Ireland has been in what we refer to as the use and learn phase. Safety features that appear on medicinal products consist of two components: a unique identifier, which is a 2D barcode that contains information unique to that product, and the other is an anti-tamper device. There are two main requirements set out in the Delegated Regulation that, depending on the supply model, you as wholesalers must perform. The first is verification, and the other is decommissioning. Looking first at verification, there are two scenarios under which a wholesaler is required to verify safety features on medicinal products. The first is at the point of returns received from other wholesalers or from individuals entitled to supply medicinal products to the public. Returned medicinal products must be verified and be in an active state before they can be returned to saleable stock. The second scenario, in which a wholesaler is required to verify the safety features, is if the product is received from anyone other than the manufacturer, marketing authorization holder, or the designated wholesaler. The designated wholesaler is designated by the MAH by way of a written contract to store and distribute medicinal products covered by their marketing authorization. Just to look a little bit closer at who is required to verify safety features, if you consider the supply chain in example 1, if you are a wholesaler, like the wholesaler in blue, that has received medicinal products from the designated wholesaler in white, there's no requirement for you to verify safety features prior to supply. You can see here that the individual entitled to supply the public has responsibilities with respect to verifying and decommissioning safety features. In example 2, if you are like the wholesaler 2 here in grey, who has obtained medicines from wholesaler 1, who is not the designated wholesaler, or the manufacturer, or the MAH, you must verify safety features prior to onward supply, in this case to wholesaler 3 in blue. Similarly, wholesaler 3 in blue received medicinal products from wholesaler 2. As wholesaler 2 is not the designated wholesaler, wholesaler 3 must verify safety features prior to onward supply. When we talk about verifying safety features, there are a number of steps within that you, as a wholesaler, will need to perform. The first is to scan the 2D barcode so that the unique identifier can be verified against the details saved in the National Repository System. Check the details on the repository system match the details of the physical product. Perform a physical check to ensure that the anti-tamper device is still intact. It is important to remember that you can verify at any time after receipt. However, it must be done prior to dispatch. There are some exceptions in the Delegated Regulation as to when verification is not required. The first is that a product changes ownership, but it remains in the physical possession of the same wholesaler. And the second is when a medicinal product is distributed within the same member state between two warehouses belonging to the same wholesaler or the same legal entity where no sale takes place. As mentioned previously, there are two main requirements set out in the Delegated Regulation that, depending on the supply model, you as wholesalers are required to perform. The first is verification, and the other is decommissioning. So decommissioning is the action of changing the active status of a unique identifier in the repository system to a status which will impede any further successful verification of the authenticity of that unique identifier. There are some scenarios under which a wholesaler will be required to decommission a unique identifier. Upon export from the European Economic Area, for returns when you're not approving them to saleable stock, when sending products for destruction, if providing samples to the competent authority, when distributing medicinal products to persons entitled to supply medicinal products to the public who do not operate within a healthcare setting or a pharmacy. So some examples of this are veterinarians, dentists, opticians. This is in line with Article 23 of the Delegated Regulation. When considering the requirement to decommission a unique identifier, it's important for you to consider that there's some criteria which needs to be met before the system will allow the decommissioning to be reversed. So the reversal must be conducted by the same entity at the same location where the decommissioning initially took place. For example, if the unique identifier is decommissioned by a pharmacist in a pharmacy setting and returned to you, you cannot recommission that unique identifier as you were not the entity that decommissioned it in the first place. Reversing decommissioning cannot take place more than 10 days after it was initially decommissioned. You cannot reverse decommissioning for medicinal products that have expired, been recalled, withdrawn from the market, stolen or marked as destroyed. And you cannot reverse the decommissioning for medicinal products that have been supplied to the public. Safety features and the associated requirements are intended to prevent the opportunity for falsified medicines to infiltrate the legitimate supply chain, and also to allow operators in the supply chain to identify if that has taken place. With that in mind, a wholesaler shall not supply or export a medicinal product where they have reason to believe that the packaging has been tampered with, or that verification of the unique identifier indicates that it may not be authentic. In those situations, if falsification cannot be ruled out, you are required to notify the HPRA. Ireland has been in the use and learn phase since the 9th of February 2019. So during the use and learn phase, wholesalers, hospitals and pharmacies were encouraged to verify medicines. However, they were permitted to supply medicines that had generated alert, provided there was no overriding concerns for falsification. There are a number of reasons why we are still in the use and learn phase 3 years after the Delegated Regulation came into effect. The first is Brexit. So there's no doubt that the UK leaving the EU posed some regulatory challenges for Ireland. We could plan for those regulatory challenges, and indeed we did. A lot of work went into engaging with MAHs, wholesalers and the wider health system to understand the regulatory challenges Brexit posed so that those challenges could be addressed before the UK left the EU. What we couldn't plan for, however, was what would physically happen at the port and entry points into Ireland on the day that the UK became a third country. While colleagues in Customs and Revenue were of course planning for all eventualities with respect to this, we simply had no way of knowing how quickly perfectly compliant medicinal products would make it through the ports and entry points into Ireland, and how that would impact on stakeholders, such as wholesalers. Therefore, a decision was made to enter a use and learn phase, which would be kept under continuous review. In early 2020, we were at the beginning of what turned out to be a global pandemic. So the pandemic posed a number of challenges for wholesalers, hospitals and pharmacies, which made the prospect of ending use and learn during 2020 or even during 2021 very difficult to consider and plan for. Wholesalers, at the beginning of the pandemic and all throughout the various waves of infection that we experienced here in Ireland, were dealing with an increased demand for medicine, staff shortages due to sickness, and among many other challenges. Throughout the last 3 years, the Safety Features Oversight Group met on a regular basis to discuss the challenges faced by each of the stakeholders involved, with the aim of identifying a suitable timeline for Ireland to transition out of the use and learn phase. The Safety Features Oversight Group consists of the following groups: the Irish Medicine Verification Organisation, or the IMVO. This is the organisation which manages the National Repository System. The Health Products Regulatory Authority, who regulate manufacturers and wholesalers, among other entities. The Department of Health, who are responsible for changes to national legislation. The Health Service Executive, who represented public hospitals. The Private Hospital Association, who represented private hospitals. And the Pharmaceutical Society of Ireland, who regulate pharmacists and pharmacies. In mid-2021, the Safety Features Oversight Group decided on a phased approach to ending use and learn. It would consist of 7 phases to start in Q3 2021. We now know that the final phase will end on the 30th of May 2022. Phase 1 was completed on the 28th of September 2021. It was a voluntary pilot programme with wholesalers, whereby primary wholesalers, over a 4-week period, were required to scan 1 pack from each batch at goods inwards. If any alerts were generated, they were required to quarantine the packs and conduct an investigation into the alert. During that pilot programme, we had a 5.3% alert rate. 97% of the alerts generated was due to data not being uploaded into the repository system by the MAH. All of those alerts were resolved within 2 days with no impact to patient supply. The other 3% of alerts that were generated was due to data not uploading from the Irish repository system into the EU repository system due to a technical issue with one software provider. This was rectified in 3 hours. However, if you consider that primary wholesalers are in effect the designated wholesaler, and therefore ordinarily wouldn't be required to scan any medicines, this pilot programme that wholesalers volunteered to participate in was invaluable in identifying issues before they got further down the supply chain. It also strengthened communication and processes that were in place between the wholesaler and the MAH. Phase 2, which consisted of FMD software providers turning on red, amber, green colour coding systems for alerts, was completed on the 10th of September 2021. Prior to this, even if an alert was generated, the system would display green as default. This turning on of the colour coding system just focused the operator's attention to what was showing up on the system once a product was scanned. Phase 3 and 4 occurred on the same date, the 28th of February 2022. So Phase 3 was the end of the use and learn period for returns for wholesalers. So this meant that wholesalers were now required to scan returns to ensure that they were in an active state before returning them to saleable stock. If an alert is generated, the wholesaler is required to quarantine the pack and investigate the alert. Phase 4 saw the red, amber, green colour coding system being turned on for pharmacies and hospitals, like it had been done for the wholesalers back in September. Both phases were completed on the 28th of February 2022, with no significant issues reported to date. Phase 5 consists of a pilot programme, similar to the one that was completed in September with the wholesalers. This time, wholesalers, hospitals and pharmacies that wish to be involved are required to investigate any alerts that are generated as a result of scanning activity. They do not have to withhold packs from supply. However, it is more to get them into the practice of investigating alerts and ensuring that they have the processes in place to do so. The pilot is being managed by the IMVO and it is taking place on a rolling basis from the start of April until the end of the use and learn period. Phase 6, due to occur on the 9th of May, is in effect the go-live date for wholesalers in Ireland. All alerts that are generated at wholesale level must be investigated and suspected falsification ruled out prior to supply, or in the case of returned medicines, before they are returned to saleable stock. Wholesalers will be out of the use and learn phase for 3 weeks before they are joined by hospitals and pharmacies on the 30th of May. Once again, for those stakeholders, all alerts that are generated must be investigated and suspected falsification ruled out prior to supply. The 30th of May this year will be the end of the use and learn phase in Ireland. Of course, the phased approach to ending use and learn was decided by the Safety Features Oversight Group taking into account the unique challenges faced by each of the stakeholders involved. So the Safety Features Oversight Group has engaged with impacted stakeholders on a frequent basis, with each competent authority responsible for communicating with the stakeholders they regulate. Just to give you an idea on the type of communication that we have had with impacted stakeholders to date, we've had written, targeted communications prior to the implementation of each phase. We've run pilot programs to help us to identify specific issues and give the stakeholders involved an opportunity to test their own internal processes. The IMVO has held interactive information sessions for wholesalers, pharmacies and hospitals. The IMVO is currently developing alert handling guidance. So this guidance defines the roles and responsibilities for all stakeholders in investigating any alerts that are generated. This document is currently in draft and is available in draft to participants in the pilot study that is being managed by the IMVO. It is anticipated that this guidance will be finalised by the IMVO during May. And finally, the IMVO will have a helpline for pharmacies and hospitals once Use and Learn concludes at the end of May in order to assist them with the transition. It is envisaged that the helpline will be available 7 days a week. Finally, just to look at some considerations for wholesalers as you navigate the post-Use and Learn phase. Ensure your processes and procedures are future-proof. So what I mean by this, you've likely put a significant amount of work into determining where you sit in the supply chain and if you are required to verify unique identifiers. If you are an entity that has established that you only ever receive from the designated wholesaler and therefore you don't need to verify, what happens if, going forward, business requirements change and new suppliers are onboarded? Make sure that the processes and procedures that you've put in place will prompt you to consider if you are required to verify. Similarly, if you are a wholesaler that currently only supplies pharmacies and hospitals, what happens if, for business reasons, the company decides to supply dentists or veterinarians? Make sure that the processes and procedures that you have in place will prompt you to consider the need to decommission medicinal products if you are supplying any new customer types that are called out in Article 23 of the Delegated Regulation. Don't forget about the tamper evidence seal. So when we talk about verifying safety features, we do spend a significant amount of time talking about the act of scanning the 2D barcode. How that will be done, when that will be done, does it even need to be done? Don't forget that the tamper evidence seal is one component of a two-part system that makes up a safety feature. Make sure the tamper evidence seal is checked prior to supply and that you have a process in place for documenting that that check has been performed. Maintain records of any verification or decommissioning activities conducted. Once we have exited the Use and Learn phase, this is an area which may be reviewed during future inspections. Consider a policy on returns. As already mentioned, the Use and Learn for returns for wholesalers ended on the 28th of February 2022. That meant that you are required to ensure that returned medicinal products are in the active state prior to returning to saleable stock. As part of that, you may have received returns back that had been decommissioned. Because you, as the wholesaler, did not perform the initial decommissioning step, that pack would have had to have been returned to the customer that decommissioned the pack in order for it to be reversed, which only then would allow you to return it to saleable stock. If you've not already done so, we would advise that you develop a policy on returns that are received back in the decommissioned state. You need to be explicit in outlining, if you accept returns, what will happen if a customer returns a product that is in a decommissioned state, and any action that you required the customer to perform prior to returning the product, such as confirming that it is in an active state prior to returning. You should ensure that this policy is communicated to all existing customers and flagged to any new customers prior to supply. Continue to engage with the HPRA and the IMVO. Based on the level of engagement and feedback the HPRA and the IMVO have received from wholesalers over the last 3 years, we believe that wholesalers are very well prepared to exit the Use and Learn phase. However, with that being said, we do accept that there may be some teething issues as we transition to the live system and when we are joined by other stakeholder groups such as the pharmacies and hospitals. Please continue to engage with the HPRA and the IMVO with regards to any issues you face or perceive that you may face. Finally, please reference the IMVO Alert Handling Guidance. This guidance defines the roles and responsibilities for all stakeholders in investigating any alerts generated so that the investigation can be concluded quickly. There may be aspects of that alert handling guidance that you can incorporate into your own processes and procedures. Finally, I've included the links to some resources that you may wish to consult. Thank you.